But if you are listening to this right now and you have a challenge in that you are listening to podcasts and you're growing and you're studying and you're online and you're reading books and your partner isn't, it is just a ticking, I'm going to finish my sentence with this, it's a ticking time bomb. Hello, this is Dr. Rowe and you're listening to the Growth Tribes podcast with Dr. Rowe and Harms. This is the podcast where two completely different generations tackle the most challenging topics that people are facing today. Above all else, the main reason that we chose to develop and record these podcasts is because we both have a passion for helping people go through life transformation, for improving their lives, for taking their lives to a completely different level. And it's our hope, our genuine, sincere hope, that by the end of each of these episodes, you'll have gained at least one insight that you can take away and apply directly into your own life. Practical tools, voices that come in from both generations, the younger generation with tips and tools and the older generation with a sense of wisdom and experience, so that you can help unlock your true potential, to give the opportunity to make changes both on a personal, professional, financial and relationship level, and to give you a chance to impact both your lives and the lives of other people around you. So we welcome you. Welcome to the Growth Tribes podcast.
Hello, it's Harms here and welcome to another episode of the Growth Tribes podcast. And today we're talking about relationships. Now that's the macro topic, but getting more specific with this, we're talking about couples that either grow and develop together or they don't grow and develop together. And what are the results of either one of these scenarios? So Ro may not be aware of this, but around my age group, we're very much there was a couple of years ago what feels like a phrase which was thrown out, and many couples would, with their super fit bodies, put themselves on social media or whatever, and the phrase or the hashtag would be couples that train together stay together. And this is one of those classic cliches, but as we know with cliches, there's a ring of truth to them. Because if we look at this example, couples that train together stay together, the training here, the exercise, is a form of growth and development. So although it became a bit of a joke and it's a laugh, and actually the people typically laughing at this are the people that don't train together, ironically, but the fact is it is possible and it is worth digging deeper because there's truth to this, and it translates into different areas of growth which is less tangible to the naked eye. Whereas there we can see the end results of two couples that have, whether it's cycled together, exercise, weight lifted or whatever. But the discussion I want to have with Ro, because Ro, your experience in this field is massive. And we're talking about experience in terms of coaching couples as part of relationships. You've taught couples as part of these large relationship events. You've coached couples through big educational decisions, whether it's financial, whether it's a change in career path. But the big thing, I guess, if we underline a hypothesis, is the opposite happens when couples don't grow together. Where couples grow together, they will stay and remain together, and they will develop and have these amazing relationships, which often people can see via social media. But if they don't, the opposite can happen. They can drift apart, possibly split. But I want to hand over to Ro and ask Ro the question, which is this something you agree with, Ro? Have you observed this? Especially since you've coached all those people like I've described, and maybe talk into the space of what is your experience with couples in relationships. Because without a doubt, I am underplaying this. And I personally have not attended your relationship event, so I hope that will definitely reappear in the future. So, Ro, over to you.
Thanks, Harms. First of all, press the pause button. If you've got a partner that is not listening to this, I would highly recommend you get them to listen to this now, and even persuade them to listen to the first 5 to 10 minutes of this, because this is going to be a seriously hot, potentially provocative subject, and it is one that, and you've put your finger on it, Harms. I mean, in the last 30 something years I've been in front of people, I cannot tell you how heart-wrenching it is sometimes to see people who genuinely previously have fallen in love and want to stay together and have wanted to stay together, but because of this one subject that you've raised, which is they're not growing together, things have changed. And the relationship is just not how it was when they first met. Remember, physically, they will always grow together. They will age. Emotionally, they may or may not grow together. Emotional development is very different. So we can physically age and we can age with time. Spiritually, that's another subject that we could talk about maybe. But the key thing here, the point I want to make is that if you're a couple and you're listening to this and you're facing loggerheads right now because one of you wants to grow and the other one doesn't, it is a matter of time before this becomes one of the key underlying reasons why this relationship may not last. So it's a major subject, Harms, and I can't stress. I mean, if you said to me, well, what kind of age groups have you had this experience with? Typically, the ages that of the people I've seen are everything from teenagers that I've worked with over in the past right through to 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. But the teenagers tend not to experience it in the same emotional way. Even people in their 20s tend not to experience it in the same emotional way. But when they hit your age group, the 30s and above, that's when the magnifying glass comes out on this subject. And depending on their tolerance levels, depending on how connected they are physically, sexually, intimately, the length and the protraction of that experience, in other words, how long the pain can be sustained by one of the partners before they just go, I've had enough now, that will vary. So it might sound like I'm being dramatic, but if you are listening to this right now and you have a challenge in that you are listening to podcasts and you're growing and you're studying and you're online and you're reading books and your partner isn't, it is just a ticking, I'm going to finish my sentence with this, it's a ticking time bomb. Over to you. And I mean that sincerely. I've worked with so many couples who I've had to pull back and hopefully I'll ask questions that provoke some of the learnings I've had from this. But we're laughing in a sense that I want you to sit up as a listener and go, okay, I kind of relate to this, or you've seen it in somebody else and maybe pass this on to somebody else. But it is a serious subject. And I'm glad it's one that, we've both picked up today, and well done for raising it.
Yeah, Ro, and one of the things that I want to leave listeners with by the end of this is, like every single Growth Tribes podcast, is yes, we're going to talk you through the struggle, things that we observe, things that we've seen from two different viewpoints. But one is by leveraging Ro's experience you've had with couples in different fields. But by the end of it, there's a solution, there's a way forward, because what we're not saying, Ro, and I've heard you say this in the past, is, something which really hooked me is, on stage you've said to couples who are in a position where technically the things that we're talking about today is what's really affected them, is you will not give up on their relationship, and you telling them, we will not give up on your relationship, on any relationship, until we work through the process. Can you just talk to that space briefly, because that stuck with me, the fact that there's two people here sitting with you who are very ready to give up on their relationship, but you're sitting there saying to them directly, we are not going to be giving up on your relationship. That is not our primary objective.
Yeah, that's a great observation. And actually you witnessed that with a couple who were literally living apart, if I remember, at the very last day of a turning point some years ago now. Look, it's slightly more different for, say, you and I turning up into somebody's situation. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, yeah, but you don't understand, guys, I'm at the end of my tether. I've been in and out of this same conversation with my partner. And maybe we can go through the stage on this a little bit later in this podcast, but I'm at the end of my tether. And so you might think there's a solution, but I don't see a solution. And often when we're in the shit, if we're in the pain, we're right up alongside the elephant, all we can see is grey. And many years ago, I learned a simple phrase, sometimes you can be too close to the elephant, all you can see is grey. And by stepping back from the elephant, you suddenly realize, oh, it's actually an elephant, and there's an ear, there's a foot, all I can see is grey before that. That's what happens when we're too close to the pain. Somebody like myself that comes in with my approach, it would be, first of all, the question is, do you still love each other? And in many cases, people actually still do. They're in love. They've just reached a point where they cannot tolerate a certain aspect of each other's behavior. And it's separating the behavior versus the biological, the physiological, the sexual, the intimate, the emotional, the spiritual connection that may still be there between the two of them. And that might have been what's been holding them together. So there's this innate feeling that everybody has a chance to work on it. And I can't, when I'm in front of them, if they come to me and ask me the question, I can't allow that place to slip. I have to hold that space with them and then go into deep questions. And the questions are often the questions that they haven't been able to ask each other, haven't had the tools to ask each other, or the space has not been right for it. So I have to, as you saw, I think if and from memory, about 3 or 4 years ago when we did this on stage, there's a couple that literally couldn't look at each other. They sat opposite sides of the stage in different directions. Do you remember that?
I remember
It was
that.
on the last day. So what I did was I got them to start in one place and talk individually about their circumstances. And maybe we can do this as part of the session tonight in the wrap up as we're recording this. And then slowly got them physiologically to come round, face each other. And then I started to ask the questions on behalf of each other. And that opened up the conversation. So if you're listening to this and you feel that you don't understand, I think I've outgrown my partner, there's just no chance now. There's always one last chance. And out of today, hopefully you might get some insight into what that could be. I think that's probably a good way to approach it.
Great. And what this allows me to do, just having listened to that description, is also paint these amazing couples in a great light, because refocusing back on what we're talking about in this podcast, they have come to your relationship event, your growth seminar, your personal development seminar, or they are listening to the Growth Tribes podcast, or they watch the relationship course within the Growth Tribes Vault, which is a series and it's got lots of information within that vault and that particular series. What they are doing fundamentally is they are growing as a couple. They've come and stepped into the arena together to grow and develop as a couple so that they can tighten their bond. Whereas what I want to focus on is what happens, and this will be I guess this will be the frame of the entire show today, which is we're going to have a conversation hopefully around 3 core questions, which is really answering the question why, how, and what. And the context of these questions will make sense as we work through the episode, which is what happens, or why does it happen that when one person grows and the other doesn't? What is the result of that? And I guess if I ask the first question, Ro, of these 3, which is, you mentioned couples still love each other, which is amazing. But why do people who still love each other suddenly get into this situation where one grows quicker than the other? This now leads to conflict. Like, what is the reason for that? What have you observed in your time?
That's a good question. And actually, just rewinding a little bit, sometimes people come to an event not to actually stay together, but to find a way to part in a sensible way, or to find out if there is anything still there. So yes, some people definitely come to grow, but others come to try and find a way to navigate through it. And it is tricky. I mean, if you're listening to this and you feel you're in that space, it's such a sensitive subject. And Harms has asked the right leading question, which is, why does it happen? And I think there's 5 stages. So let me describe.
And before you dive into those 5 stages, what I would want to say is those couples who come in for those different reasons as well, that also demonstrates a level of emotional development,
Correct.
Emotional maturity, because that's not easy, right?
No.
To come into a space to say, is it the right decision to now part or change our relationship, whether it's into a loving relationship, into a friendship instead? And that takes guts, that takes bravery and courage to put yourself through that. So in a weird way, that is a kind of growth in itself, because this now leaves them entering the next phase of their life with way more clarity. I think that's one of the things people come to you for.
I think that's a very good point. And ironically, although you might think, well, it has to be a relationship event, you never know what it's going to be. So, for example, we had a couple who came to me when I was doing a free presentation, and I was talking about the Communicating with Impact work program that was coming up. It's an intensive 3-day that we run. And they said, we've done this with this speaker, and we've done this with an American speaker over here, and I'm not going to name names. And they just said, we haven't had any breakthroughs, and we feel like we're at the end of our tether. And I said, well, after speaking to them for 5 minutes, I said, you're working on all these other areas, but it's really clear to me that what the challenge in this situation is actually communication. So, because they said, oh, isn't your communication program purely about business and people wanting to expand and grow in their business, etc.? I said, look, communication happens at all levels, with your kids, with yourselves as a couple, internally, externally. And I picked 2 or 3 things up that was going on between them, and they just looked at each other, and she kind of looked at him as if to say, that's kind of what I've been trying to tell you, honey. And I said, come and do the 3 days. And I promise you, forget business and everything else. It will give you a clear indication of where the breakdown's been in your communication. So they came to the table with that blank page. And that, I think, is the way to listen to the rest of this podcast, is to not make a judgment. Don't think, oh, I need to hear, my partner needs to hear this. This is what I've been trying to tell them for ages. Just listen from the perspective of what can you learn for it? Because if you can learn something from us here, and you take that shifting you back into your relationship. It might be that little shift that changes the way they receive you and the way they communicate back to you and the way they may want to grow with you. And hopefully they might even listen to this podcast. So you've raised a good point. I think the growth happens at all stages as long as you put yourself in the arena for growth.
Absolutely. Now I took us off on a tangent, but focusing back on the question, which is, people who love each other, when one grows and the other doesn't, why does this lead to conflict? What's the reason for that?
So 5 stages essentially, and these 5 stages could be condensed, but I think if I break them into 5, you might find, here's a simple question. Ask yourself this question right now. If you're in a relationship, what stage are you at in this? And you might not get all the way to stage 5. You might be at stage 2, you might be at stage 3, you might say, actually, I feel like I'm teetering between these. So I'll go through this fairly succinctly, and then I'll leave it for you, Harminder, to dig deeper. And I think it's important for me to say, if you're in the younger generation here, if you're in Harminder's generation, whether it's the 20s or in his case, the 30s, that's a vulnerable group, because you might listen to this and go, yeah, it's not for now. But ironically, you're probably right. It isn't for now. But stage 3 will be definitely for you, and you might not be there now, but if you follow the path of pretty much 90 to 95% of the population, you will get there, and it's a question of how you manage it.
So before you dive into stage 1, Ro, I mean, this is so fascinating, exciting.
I'm trying to frame this up because there's a lot of people that will be indifferent to this and go, I'm not there now, I don't need to listen to this.
Yeah, and what I would say to somebody listening who's in my age group, which is, anything between 25, 35, just hitting 37 now, because we know people are getting into longer term relationships slightly later.
Correct, yeah.
Which is, that actually is the critical time. And I was going to mention this point later, but whilst you're framing this up, it's useful to note, which is, my feeling is at this age where somebody may have just been in a relationship. Maybe they start the new relationship at the age of 22, 23, 24. They've maybe been together for 3 or 5 years. And when they get to stage 3, and I've heard Ro describe these stages before, which he's going to share with you, when they get to stage 3, it's often too late. They've been together too long, and they're left in this fork in the road. What do they decide? Do they either stay together or do they split? And when you split with somebody after 5, 6 years, of course, it's not easy. And of course, having been doing it, and you're suddenly now find yourself at the age of 35, 36, you've got all this other anxiety around that. So I think by knowing these stages up front, it can save you so much time in the world of relationships and the people you spend your loving time with.
Yes, and actually, Harminder, and this is really interesting. If you imagine a sinusoidal wave, this sort of lovely sort of snaky shaped wave that exists, they are the 5 stages. You climb up to stage at a certain point, stage 3, then it starts to go down the other side, which is a slippery slope, at which point somebody goes, you know what, bang, stage 5, go different directions, which we'll come to in a minute. And then they start another relationship. And guess what? The pattern doesn't change, because the reality is, if you become aware of something, as we've talked about so often in the Growth Tribes, that level of awareness you have in yourself, become a silent witness, you can stop the pattern happening. You fall in love with somebody and you can make sure that you continue to grow instead of following this cycle, which is these definitely 5 stages. So actually,
we've teased too much. I think we should get into the stages.
Yeah, okay, but in a way, even if we didn't talk about them, I can say that this cyclical effect happens in many people's cases. It's the 4th time I've been in a relationship, the same thing's happening. Why is this happening? Okay, well, let's look at the stages and see what you can do to improve on that. So what's stage 1? Stage 1 is when you meet. It's when you first meet somebody and it's like, wow, ding, everything's just like sparks flying. There's lust, there's passion, there's intimacy, there's connection. You do anything for that person. And that is a point of maximum growth for a lot of couples, meaning that the biggest growth is you're learning about each other. I mean, this is a subject, funnily enough, that person becomes the study of your life, that you want to find out about how they breathe, how they laugh, what makes them cry, what makes them happy, what makes them sad, what turns them on, what makes them aroused, what makes them excited, what makes them passionate. This is all growth. So you're in a massive stage of growth. So all your other values, the values that might be tucked away in the background that are your core underlying values. Even health. I mean, I've seen people compromise a value of health when it comes to meeting somebody they're completely absorbed with. They'll go out, they might drink a little bit more, they might even eat food that they may not normally eat because they're with this person and it's amazing, especially if it's very physical, very sexual. They just get on and connect. And a lot of their core values slip by the way initially. Less sleep, of course, especially if it's very...
Yes, staying awake all night. I've been there, yeah.
Yeah, because you're going to do whatever it takes. You'll drive further, you'll fly further, you'll speak on the phone for longer because you're in this absolute sponge phase of just growing and learning about each other. So core values, unless you're an emotionally developed couple who bring these core values out early, do not come to the surface very often. You'll connect with a couple of them, but there's more of a physical, biological, attractive force, a chemistry, something going on there. You're drawn to each other. There's and if it's a deep, genuine soul connection as well, it's very, very strong. That's stage one.
So Ro, before you move on from stage one, there's something interesting which you speak about, which, in your events, you'll dive deeper on this, but it's worth giving the listeners a snapshot of almost why this happens at stage one. And it's tied to, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which can give us this, it's not to say it's a false feeling, but what it does, it's this euphoric feeling.
Addiction.
This addictive feeling.
Addiction, yeah.
But why does that addiction happen? What's the link there?
Yeah, so good memory, very good. So actually what Harminder's referring to is the fact that when we get 2, 3, ideally 3 or 4 of our core basic human needs met on a consistent and regular basis, it forms an addiction for any human being, myself included. Speaking is a classic example. Meets all my needs. It's addictive. Each time I come away from speaking in front of an audience, I've met all of them. It's incredible. I want to go back and do more of it. So without going into lots of detail, these needs, and they're covered by different people over the years. Maslow kind of put a foundation in place. There's other famous people as well in psychology. In more recent, our generation, probably something like Tony Robbins reshaped it, gave it another slightly different perspective, very good one as well. And that essentially says that each human being has a basic need for security. Tony Robbins might say certainty, whatever you want to call it. For me, very much that need, it is a foundation need for everybody to have a sense of security. And I want stability. That's another word to put on it. So being in a stable relationship is very, very powerful for a lot of people. They feel comfortable. That's another word you can attach to. Control is another word you can put against it, because when you're in control of something, and this is an important one in relationships, if you're in control of something, you've got absolute certainty. If you don't have control, you've got a complete lack of certainty.
And an example how that plays out in terms of real terms is, imagine a couple who now live together and they share the rent payments together. That's a security paid for. It's almost like a personal level of safety and security. Yes. You're living under one roof. You're sharing the rent. Instead of £1,000 each, is now £500 each. Now that starts to form this base level of addiction.
Yeah, and actually, interestingly enough, it's a good point actually, because that certainty can be an attractive force. If you meet somebody that's very financially stable and you've been in relationships from the past which weren't stable, but you were the one that was supporting, and those relationships break up because you felt frustrated that they weren't financially growing and they weren't emotionally growing, then you go find another partner, and this time this partner has a good, strong financial stability. There you go. That's the start. As you say, it's the initial hook for the addiction, but also you feel much more safe with this person, and that is a strong human need for all of us. Now, in Maslow's terms, it's kind of the need for food and everything that creates, shelter, roof over our head. That's that basic security that we need. But the opposite to that, in terms of psychological, is variety. Because the thing about security is, if you have the same of everything all the time, you get bored. So on a psychological level, the opposite to that is variety, or I use the word freedom. Everyone has a different phrase for it. So it's this need to grow and expand and to have different things in our life. I think Tony Robbins talks about variety. I like to talk about this freedom of spirit. So the opposite to being cooped up and locked down and secure is like, I want to expand and be free. And that is also a very important need for all of us. If you're listening to this and you've been on a lockdown, there's a growing feeling, I want to get out. I want to go and travel, meet my friends and connect and meet other people and have more variety. So they're two conflicting values that we all need. Their needs, their values, whatever you want to phrase them, they are actually a basic need, but they can also be a core value for somebody as well. So these two fight each other, because you might want lots of security, but then you get bored, so you want to go and have more freedom, and you go out and have more freedom, but then you start to do something crazy, and then you think, shit, I better start being safe again. And this is where relationships can break up, because if people get bored, they go looking elsewhere for that freedom, and this is where affairs can kick in. But that's another conversation, maybe for another podcast.
I wonder how people who are seeking those affairs out, and no judgment, are doing this during coronavirus and COVID-19 lockdown. That would be how are they getting away with that? It's just curious. Just came to mind. So that leads us on to stage 2, right, which is now an expansion on those needs.
Well, okay, so very quickly, so they're 2 of the 6 needs that we have. So the other 4 needs are, one is a need for connection with other people, and the other one opposite to that is a sense of ego or significance. So we've got love and connection, and we've got a sense of ego. Now, these are conflicts, again, because these human needs, when we're first meeting somebody, we're getting all this met. We're getting the variety we just talked about. We're getting the certainty that, oh my gosh, this person's amazing. I absolutely know that when I see them again, I'm certain I'm going to find something new about them, and they're probably going to love to see me. They're going to answer my phone. I'm going to get excited. There's the connection, which is another need, which is the love connection, the belonging, as Maslow called it. And then there's this ego, or this sense of importance. I feel important. She loves me. He loves me. He's connected with me. He sent me flowers. She sent me flowers. She sent me a text. She's taking me out to meet her friends. I feel really important. I've got 4 needs met there. That is incredibly addictive. Now, on the top of that, Maslow talked about growth, and he talked about contribution to other people. Self-actualization is how he packaged it all up. So growth is this element on top of all these other needs that we need to have met first. So the other 4, typically the ones we need to meet first. After that, after you've got those needs met, as a human being, you go, okay, now I kind of need to grow. I want to grow beyond these now. I want to expand beyond this place to become even better and bring this back down into the lower part of my needs. And I want to give beyond myself and help other people. So the top 2 needs, growth and contribution, are not necessarily primary. They typically sit behind the other 4. Am I making sense here, Harms? Normally I do a diagram to show this, but I haven't.
Of course.
I'm wiggling my hands a lot.
So what we're saying is that those first needs are almost like essential. They come from a place of deficiency, from a place of, I need to get this first. Once those are in place, we can then focus on growth. And it's very hard to focus on growth without those in place. So that's just that's just another way of just phrasing it, I guess.
Yeah, and of course, when you meet, which 4 get met first? Well, not 4, but 6. Because not only are you getting connection, not only are you getting variety, not only are you getting security or certainty about, yes, it's going to be amazing, and you're getting significance and importance, but you're growing because you're learning about somebody new, and maybe they're sharing something new with you about themselves, and you're contributing, you're giving, because you're probably sharing a gift, doing something for them, opening a door, treating them to something. And of course, that's that part of your human nature that wants to give and help somebody else. You got 6 frigging needs met.
That can happen instantly, right? That can happen within a space of a week. It can happen within the space of a month. And that's really high impact.
High impact, addictive. You're satiated, which means you've had a huge amount of stuff all in one go. And the question, of course, is how long does it last? So that leads us to stage 2. And stage 2 could be weeks, could be months, could be years. Typically, it's a 6 to 12 month period I've seen in people, because now you've kind of got past that shiny stage and you're starting to get into a rhythm, and now your core values are starting to come to the surface a little bit now. And as a person, maybe you're not growing so much with them. You haven't got as much excitement in the sense that you kind of know who they are now, and your basic needs are coming back up to the surface now. You're getting to a rhythm. It's like a 3-legged race. Initially, it's a little bit all over the place, exciting, and then suddenly you've got a rhythm, and now we're into a bit of a rhythm. And now stage 2 is your true needs and values start to emerge, and so do theirs. So whereas before they were hidden, they were masked by all of these amazing things happening. Hopefully this is making sense. Now their true core values and needs are starting to come to the surface, which is a lovely thing if they're the right values for you and your values align with them. But if they're not, this is where the clash starts to happen. And those needs could be needs for more security, or maybe a little bit more need for growth comes out, but not growth about the other person now. Hey, I've spent the last 6 to 12 months growing with you and about you. I want to go learn something new. What do you think? And the other person's like, no, that's not really who I am. Oh shit, how come I didn't spot that before? So this is what starts to happen. Well, it might be that there's a conflict over your values, over integrity. When you first met, it was incredible, lots of connections, lots of physical, sexual, intimate, lots of great things. But now you're starting to see a little bit about how this person operates in the world of finance, in money, in how they are in their job. Maybe you've got a value of hard work ethic. You value working hard. But now, after 6 to 12 months, you realize, actually, having spent more time at their place and seeing how they are, they're not really that hardworking. And I thought they said they were earning money, but they're not really. In fact, they're not doing. And all of a sudden, their true nature comes out. Now, I'm trying to paint a contrasting picture. It might be the opposite. It might be they're amazing and that your values are growing together. But what I'm talking about here are the values that do not align. I'm going to press pause because I'm talking quite fast here. Am I making sense? I want to, because you're kind of my soundboard here.
Yeah, that does make sense. And where I have personally seen this play out in life, and let's just take a simple example like the program, such as Communicating with Impact. Now, a couple has a choice. Do they attend Communicating with Impact as a couple and pay the ticket price for that as a couple, or do they turn up separately, or does one turn up and one never goes? And often the reason where one never goes is one is driven from a place of, or the need of security, where they say, okay, I'm quite happy with how things are at the moment. I'm comfortable. I don't really want to take a risk in my job. I don't really want to learn this new skill that's just going to rock the boat a bit. Whereas the other person is saying, well, I want to learn these skills because I can leverage these in the workplace. I can get promotion. We can expand our life. Or I want to start in business and I need a skill of negotiation or whatever it may be. I need to turn into a public speaker for my business, and I want confidence to speak in front on the stage with all the tools and techniques. Now, Ro, that's what I've observed as a polar opposite of somebody who's wanting the need of variety, as an example, to then grow and expand, whereas somebody's based on security saying, actually, if you go and do that, one, it's going to cost a bit of money. One, what if it rocks the boat? And that can play out. And I think you may have seen that play out quite often as well.
You've raised a fantastic point, because that actually could be one of the first signs of stage 3, because now you've had that amazing period together and you've gone and done the typical things that you'd, wherever you always wanted to travel to, and of course you go and you visit those places and you experience each other and their joy and their exploration, and maybe you're trying to create new magic moments together. And then starts to come out this need for growth. We're starting to dig a bit deeper now into our part of who we are. And you say, honey, let's go to this communication event. Let's go to this property event. Let's go to this spiritual event, whatever it is.
So this is like the peak of the wave, because you described a wave. So as we framed this up, you said there's a wave. Now,
yes,
stage 3 is probably the peak there.
Very good. So we're coming up now, and what we're doing is we're still on the up curve, but now this is where we start to see it flatten off, where it potentially goes into the sine wave and dips down. And the conversation is, as you just described it, honey, you go, I don't really want to go to that. And then this point now, you're the person, husband or wife or boyfriend, girlfriend at this point probably, and you're going, or boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever the relationship is, you're going, well, hold on a minute, but this is something I thought when we first met, we talked about this, and I really want to learn more about this. Yeah, but actually, you just go and do it. It's fine. You just go do the seminar. But I really want to do it with you, honey. I mean, look at what they're covering. Some of these things are amazing. And this is where the conversations go one of two ways. You accept it and you just go do it. You think, it's just a seminar. I'll go do it anyway. I'll come back and share it with them. Or you start to have a different conversation. We'll come to that in a minute. And I think you've picked up on a very good point. That, to me, is the first sign. It is something like that. But it could be something else. It could be you want to go see the ballet. They don't want to go see the ballet. You want to go see a concert. They don't want to see the concert. This now starts to come into play where they're, instead of maybe trying to help you meet your needs by being part of your experience and growing with you, even if they don't fully want to do it, they're actually being part of that with you. They're now making a choice, and this is a value. They're making a choice to say, no, you just go and do it yourself. So they value their own privacy, their own independence, and their own lack of connection with you at that point. And maybe they're not supporting you in that. And they're saying, it's all right, you just go and do it yourself. Now, I'm not saying that should always be the case, that everyone has to do everything together.
That's the question I was going to ask you, Ro, which is, what if there's a couple who's listening to this and one says, yeah, but I don't, just a random example, which, climbing, right? Because me and you have recently done that.
Right.
We signed up to the local climbing center. Okay, I don't want to go climbing, but I'm more than happy to support you in this. Like, I love it. Like, please spend a couple of hours a week and just really enjoy it and grow in that area. And you tell me all about it. What we're saying is you can support, like you don't have to go and do it alongside with them.
No, I think that's a good challenging question as well, and it's important that we bring these up. So Harminder's spot on. Look, there are going to be certain things that you want to do that physically or for whatever reason your partner isn't either able to do or has any inclination to do at all. That's not to say that they can't be involved in some way, but it's just that it's something more for you. I guess what I'm trying to say is at that point there, as an isolated case, that stands on its own. And you could argue, actually, well, for example, in your case, G, she probably doesn't want to go climb. She might say, let me come watch it for a couple of times. It'd be great to see what you do.
And pregnant at the time. So
exactly, yeah. Also, we had COVID when it was kicking off. So, but the point being that the partner that's not doing it, at least if they show some support and encouragement, great. But now let's imagine we are 18 months down the line and you wanted to go on skiing trip. They didn't want to come. You wanted to go do a bungee jump. They didn't want to come. You wanted to go and join a local rambling club. They didn't want to come. You wanted to join a club which goes and does, I don't know, origami, whatever it is. They didn't want to come. You wanted to go and do a course on communication with Dr. Rowe. They didn't want to come. You wanted to go and do a course on property investing because you thought maybe as a family, as a couple in the future, you could have fun. They didn't want to come. This isn't now just a one-off. This is a pattern of someone who's just not wanting to grow. And that's a different conversation now. I mean, I'm not trying to prejudice this because I think I'm just describing the countless conversations I've had with couples where, particularly an individual, where they go, oh, my husband's not here, my wife's not here. And I go, okay, well, tell me how you're feeling. I'm feeling upset. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm pissed off. Well, they're not here for this seminar. No, you don't understand, Dr. O. This has been going on for 5 years. Every time I do something. So that's a different conversation. We're at a different stage in the 5 stages. So I think your question's valid. I guess what I'm trying to do is put it into context. A one-off situation is different to a now the curve is continuing up and it's flattening more and more and more and more. Yeah. So we're coming off the top of the curve now. So I want you to just provocatively ask me anything on this because there will be people listening going, yeah, but. So if there's anything else you want to yeah, but me on, it's probably a good time to do it now.
No, that's fine. So there's going to be some questions where we explore the next stage because what we can say is that we've got a wave, and are we saying that the curve is, yes, it's flattening, but based on how the couple now has a conversation with each other at this stage, the curve can slowly go upwards, or the curve can actually start to decline.
Exactly. So at this point there, at this point here now, so this is where the person's true values and needs emerge, and all of us have it. I had it in my relationship. I'm with my partner. We've been together nearly 20 years, and she's 14 years younger than me. So after a short period of time, other sides of ourselves came out, different values, and we went through a lot of growth, and we chose to go back to stage 1 as a couple, but now not just about each other, but our own needs and our own growth. So this can either go one or two ways. It comes up and it starts to go down into stage 3, 4, 5, or you swing back into stage 1, but now on personal growth, emotional growth, spiritual growth, on your own evolution as a couple and as individuals. And that's where the watershed comes in. You have to have the ability to identify these values and these needs in another person that you're with, and realize that in order for us to continue to grow as a couple, we're going to have to keep meeting those needs. We're going to have to find a way to support that person in such a way that it's not taken away from me. If anything, it's adding to me, but at the same time, it's making them feel important. Because remember, if we start to ignore something they want to do, one of the needs that Maslow talked about is this sense of importance that we want to have. All of a sudden, if I was with you, Harms, and you were my partner, and every time you wanted to do something, I said, nah, I'm not interested. I'm now showing you that you're not important to me, or what you do is important. So that's one of your basic needs suddenly eroded.
Yes.
Another need is being now eroded because you want to connect with me and you want to be part of that relationship when I'm doing something with you. I'm now not doing that with you. So now we've lost that connection. That's 2 bloody main needs suddenly severed by my actions.
So suddenly we've gone from that addictive relationship, which was, okay, well, I'm getting 3, 4,
yeah, you're addicted to me before because I was showing these. I was part of that.
And what we're saying is, you know, once you typically hit 3 and 4 needs, there's that level of addiction, or that this is a really cool relationship. Whereas once those start to get eroded through these consistent actions like that, where, you know, I'm not interested. Oh, you just go on and do that. Oh yeah, whatever. Exactly. Then we start to remove them, and we're left with. And I think I personally, when I've been around you and you're coaching couples, where they often come to you at a point where they're left with just one remaining need. And
Yes, exactly.
that's normally the base level, that
Base level
safety, that
need.
security.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you think about it in this scenario for you and I, let's say we're in a relationship together and you go off and you've now gone to a training, you've gone to a course, you're starting to grow, learning new subjects, and you're meeting new people. Those people now are different. They're new, they're growing, they've got variety, and they're showing you attention. So suddenly, instead of you getting your sense of importance from me and me showing my commitment to you, you're not getting that from me anymore. You're getting that from somebody else. And not only that, you're getting a connection with somebody else. And then, of course, you get variety with somebody else or a group of people. And you don't need to come back to this space. That addiction to me is actually diminishing and it's growing towards a subject, a topic, or God forbid, another person, because that person's now showing you more interest than me. And it's not that you don't want to break up with me, but hey, you know what? And this just happens. It kind of erodes slowly the relationship.
Yeah, and it happens, for example, where okay, so I've gone and done that thing. I come back, and me and you are having dinner over the dinner table, and then you decide to ask the question out of the blue, which is, "Oh, how was that thing you're doing? Or how's that thing go?" And at this stage, because I've shared it and I've experienced it with all these other people, my response may be, "Yeah, it was cool. Yeah, it was fine. Yeah, it was good."
Yeah,
And then there's no longer a conversation around this either.
yeah, because you know it's going to provoke, or God forbid, you say, "Oh man, I tell you, I met this amazing person, and he this or she this," and then if that happens more than two or three, if that name comes up more than two or three times in a conversation, I'm like, "So who's this person then? What are you talking about?" And then the jealousy kicks in.
And if it's the opposite sex or the sex that
Exactly.
you're accustomed to, then
It can happen in
then there's a
businesses, by
challenge.
the way. Two business partners, forget sexual intimate relation, two business partners, one wants to grow, the other one doesn't. And then suddenly one keeps coming back and talking about this guy that they met in another business, a director or whatever, and they're doing this. And then the other business partner's going, whoa, hold on, what's going on here? And sometimes that can be enough for the other partner, whether it's an intimate relationship or a business, to go, you know what, okay, let me go and see what's going on here. Let me go and get involved with what you're doing. And that might be the leverage that brings that connection back to start a level of growth. More often than not, it's not enough. It actually creates anger.
So I'm just gonna press pause here, because what we'll do at the end of the episode is, when you get to stage 3, we will help you with some action points or a process to work through in order to then grow together, have that conversation
100%.
together. But now let's talk about stage 4, where what if we don't have that conversation? What happens then?
Okay, so let me just clarify. So stage 1 is all needs are met. Stage 2 is your true values start to emerge. Stage 3, which we've kind of touched on, but let me just clarify. Stage 3 is there's no deep conversation happening at this point between the two of you, and one of you grows quicker than the other. So just to clarify, this third stage where we're getting to the top of the peak is where you're not having the conversation you need to have. You're not having the conversation that we'll talk about at the end, which is certain things around values and where you're both at. So it becomes kind of a muted conversation, as Harminder just alluded to there. You continue to grow, your partner doesn't, and you find yourself going out more, learning more, growing more, speaking less about it at home or with your partner, and feeling more and more like, shit, this is just, I'm not sure if I can do this. But because you're so absorbed with this new growth, you kind of kid yourself, hey, things will be fine. Let me just carry on growing. And that addiction can grow somewhere else. And that's why this stage 3 can go on for years. Years, depending on the couple, the physical, if it's a very sexually connected couple, that can often outweigh the emotional growth of the other person, meaning that you might find that connection with that person is so powerful. And there's a lot of other good things there, that you can live with the lack of growth because you're getting that somewhere else. And hey, there's nothing wrong with that as long as you don't move to stage 4. So,
and stage 4 is?
Stage 4 is arguments, frustration, anger, numbness, total numbness. Fuck it. Just, you know what? I'm indifferent now. And in other words, there isn't even that physical connection. There isn't that intimacy. There isn't that passion, the thing that keeps you together or has kept you together. And now you're just really pissed off because you kind of have moved on. And you're hanging out with people that have moved on. And now you just go, you either get really angry and it gets physical, and that's when you reach out to someone like me or a coach, whatever, or you go numb to it and you just carry on, which is typically where it slides to stage 5.
So that scenario, that picture I painted where me and you at the dinner table, you asked me a question and I'm just like, yeah, it was okay.
That's stage 4.
that stage, that's me now feeling the numbness, feeling that I've got nothing to share here. There's nothing really to talk about. Oh, let's just put the television on and sit there silently and eat our dinner and watch TV. That's that kind of typical scenario which would play out in terms of numbness. And of
Yes.
course, anger, frustration, arguments, that would be what happens there.
And by
Now,
the way, we numb ourselves, exactly what you just talked about there, through the phone, through the TV, through eating, just through anything. We preoccupy ourselves. You sit down together in a room, and there's 5 minutes opportunity to connect, and you're on your phones or you're doing something else. In other words, that lovely stage one that we talked about is just anywhere to be seen. It's like two separate people living in a house together with two separate sets of needs. But as you said, financially, they're both supporting each other now, and maybe they've got a mortgage. I don't know. I mean, it depends on where you are down the cycle, but it's a tough one. And it's a common one, Harms. I mean, you may not have seen it yet because you're at that age where I started to really see it in my early 30s, because at that stage there, I was coaching, but I hadn't seen it in my peers because I was too young to see that yet. I was seeing it in older people through the coaching I was doing.
But what's interesting is that because of this tool that we have, you mentioned the phone, we can put Netflix or Amazon Prime constant video series that are being published every single week or every single month, which can help disguise in a way that the numbness is. And just let me know if this is fair, because this is what I may be observing within my generation or people who are 25, 30, 35, which is by the numbness is completely masked or disguised by things like the telephone, things like Netflix series, where you find a different way to connect, which is actually not a deeper way to connect, which is the deepness comes from the growth, the doing something which is beyond yourself, whereas you're masking it and you're defaulting it to this, I guess, soft entertainment. Is that fair to say?
Oh my gosh, that's a spot on description. I mean, what you've described there is two core needs there: connection and variety, straight through social media. So hey, if I'm not freaking getting it at home, I'll get it through watching these people. I'll get absorbed into this, and then we've got soaps and stuff out on TV. I'll lose myself there, and I can live with this because you know what, we're okay. We've got a nice house, we've got on holiday, blah blah blah. Hey, that's what people do, isn't it? And then this becomes, but it's scary. But it's happening.
It's that phrase. That's what people do. This is what a relationship is. This is what a marriage is. And that's the kind of phraseology that keeps them locked into this space for years and years and years and then decades. Because I've been on events with you, Ro, and these are couples who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s.
We've seen it. I mean, you and I have looked at each other, they've walked away, and we've sort of said they shouldn't even be together.
Yeah.
And they've come to a seminar on property to try and fix their life because they think if they can get some more money, it'll fix everything else. But they're just so disconnected. We've even seen people, and you know this, come in on the third day of an event and they're sitting in separate places because they just do not agree on anything and they're totally misaligned. And unfortunately, or fortunately, my style of teaching tends to press a lot of those buttons. And this isn't even a relationship event. This is just like, a property-based education or a communications event. So it's a tricky one, which kind of leads us to stage 5, because at this point there, if the pain is great enough, and I think that's the emphasis I need to put here, if the pain is great enough, and that could last 6 months, 12 months, 8 months, 8 years, then one or two things happen. People split up or they make a change. And that's it. They literally split up or they make a change. Otherwise, they just stay in stage 4 for a long time.
Absolutely. And that the change part is what we'll discuss at the end of this episode. So you're left with, if you are in this place or you need to share this with a friend, or like all Growth Tribes members are, is the aiming of being aware of things like this in these stages. So you can spot this in your life, or you can spot this in people close to you, so that you can provide guidance and wisdom, or provide guidance and wisdom to yourself. So the change part we'll discuss at the end. But Ro, I wanted to focus in on the stage 3 and 4 before the split happens, which can either be like in year 2, it can. And what's interesting, fascinatingly enough, I've observed in the Asian culture, or certainly in my generation, because I remember you put a timeline against this, which is 12 months, 18 months.
Very good subject, yeah.
I've seen this probably trigger at 3 years or 4 years in terms of when the split happens.
Yeah.
And
you've actually raised a good point, because I think culturally, just to jump in, I
Yeah.
think Harminder's raised a very good point. Culturally, that can protract it. If you weren't so heavily influenced by your culture, your parents, and everybody else's perception of how your relationship should be and how you've grown up for it to be, it often would happen quicker. But you're spot on. I think especially in the Asian culture, African culture, etc., where there's this community feel. Sometimes this can go on a lot longer, and then people go, "Oh my God, I didn't even know that was going on." Well, actually, it's been going on
Yeah.
for a while.
And I think with my generation, you really see it play out because if you pair my culture and my generation, the Asian culture and similar, and our world, which is we actually are masked by the fact that we don't often live together before we get married. That's not quite common. So we're experiencing stage one, two, and three in a stretched period. We're also so busy with our, which is most cultures, so busy with our careers, we're distracted by this and that, that when we finally get to the point where we're now living together on a day-to-day basis, and now one of us wants to grow, that's that kind of year 3, 4, 5 stage. And this is why the timeline can, I personally have seen it being stretched in my sort of age group, 25, 30, 35, and seeing that stretch because we've got all these distractions which take our focus away from our actual relationship. And then when we do look at our relationship, we're like, oh shit, it's stage 5 already. That happened quite quick.
Yeah, and just adding in there, if you think about what Harmin has described to you, you're a 30-something-year-old person. Forget cultural background, and you're in a relationship, and the cracks are starting to appear. You're kind of at sort of stage 2, 3, and on a daily basis, you're on Facebook, you're Instagram, you're following people. Maybe you're out in the nice car, you've got a few functions with the work, etc. There's a lot of stuff happening around you, and there, if you imagine life as a path, as a straight line, and that straight line, if it was clean and clear, you'd have an amazing experience with the right people who are right connected to you. But now it doesn't quite work for you, so you start to drift off into different directions, and all of a sudden you're distracted from the true connection with somebody because you've got all these other things happening around you, as you've described there. That's why it can go on for a lot longer, because people just accept it and they just go, well, I can numb myself, and I can live vicariously through social media, Instagram, through Netflix programs on TV, soaps on TV, all this sort of stuff. They literally.
And as a side note, Ro, imagine having posted about your amazing, highly addictive relationship for the last 3 or 4 years, and your Instagram and your, all these comments of, oh, you guys are an amazing couple, you guys are the best couple. Like, it's pretty hard to be open and honest with yourselves at that stage.
True.
That this is not going to work, and to split with that level of commitment out into the public is also a challenge. That's just a side note, because you should be aware of that as well. Having a public relationship on social media and presenting yourself in such a way is another dangerous mask for stage 3 and stage 4, where stage 4 is like we don't really hone in on it, which leads me to the next question, Ro, which is, let's go back to stage 3 to 5 and help the listeners, because again, they may be masked. All of these things may be masking the true reality of what's happening, which is, what are the signs and what have you observed on how it manifests itself? Stages 3 to 5, how does that manifest itself within a couple dynamic? And this can be any kind of couple dynamic, but how does that play out?
I think if we stopped now and just answered this question, that is such a powerful insight in this podcast, these 5 stages, because it's the awareness of it that triggers the question, oh shit, where are we at? And if you're in a good place, fantastic, but if you're not, then let's go to work on it, which we'll come to at the end. So things to look for. The obvious one is a loss of connection. So the things that you did a lot at the beginning in stage 1 and 2 start to diminish. You don't have the same interest. She or he doesn't have the same interest in you in the same way. There isn't the same length of time or attention taken to sit down and have the same conversations that you might have had for 20, 30 minutes previously. Now you're too busy. I've got to go do this. I've got to do that. Honey, I've got to go and do this. And you've become so familiar with them that you don't need to necessarily give them that attention. And that's a very quick and early sign for that as well. So you're not showing the same level of interest in the little things that they did at the beginning, which you loved. In the same way, kids, I mean, I've got you've been around my kids, and my 5-year-old is fascinated with the tiniest little things still, even though she's 5 now. getting more conscious. So she will come up to me as a 54, 55-year-old, and she'll show me something that fascinates her about a leaf or a bee or a fly. I mean, you've been with her, you know what I'm talking about, Harms.
Yeah, yeah.
And I will still show that same interest. I mean, we were out walking the other day, you were there, and do you remember the ants? We were looking at the ants.
Oh, she's fascinated. And I
Fascinated
would
by
have walked past that. Me as a person, if, you know, after, so what I loved was there was multiple ant mounds, I think they call, or nests or whatever.
anthills,
And
yeah.
anthills. So it shows you how little I know about it. But I would have maybe been, as an adult, fascinated by the first one. But what I loved was your daughter was fascinated by the first one, the second one, the third one, and the way you showed up and was just as interested and fascinated was a lesson, and that's one of the things I took away from that
Interesting.
experience.
Yeah, and that's so that's for me kept me in that space, and I've got two girls as well. So I mean that this is a whole self conversation for men, is being present and listening, and it was great because I could go back into her world, and I think that's what we forget to do. I mean, that's in simplest terms, we got to go back into our partner's world and remember that they still have an interest in something, even if we have lost that interest in their interest in that something. So that's a really big clue in that stage 3, where it's, you know, the conversations aren't happening, values are starting to come out, and now that separation of values starts to happen. Arguments is a big one, or high volume discussions, as you heard me say many times, over little things. And that's because you're getting irritated. That's definitely a sign of getting to stage 4, by the way. Now you're you know, it has nothing to do with that particular thing. It could be that they've left something in the kitchen that they haven't tidied up, or the toilet roll hasn't been replaced, or somebody's left socks or underwear somewhere, and you're channeling your frustration towards them through that. But you're really pissed off because they didn't come to that seminar with you, they didn't come and do that evening class with you, they didn't come want to learn that extra language that you've been learning, and they didn't want to come and meet some of your new friends. None of that. So guess what? I'm pissed off. What do? I just take it out in any way, shape, or form. And this is where
the reverse happens, right? The reverse happens with what you're describing, the person who's maybe on the growth path.
Correct.
The person who's not on the growth path would be just as mad about, oh, you left this, or you didn't take the bins out, as an example, but you had enough time to go see your new friends and do your new thing, and that would also play out.
Yes, and this is a challenge because it just becomes a bigger argument, and now you're both arguing about something that's nothing to do with the whatever it is, the dishes or whatever, both of you want to be right, and that's another whole thing to do with your basic human needs. And of course, it's not that you don't love each other, but you can't articulate it, and maybe you haven't had a conversation like we're talking about here, this sort of depth. And so, one of you just defaults. You go to the phone, you go to Facebook, you go to Instagram, as you talked about, you go to Netflix, whatever it is, go spend time with somebody else, or you just resubmerge yourself into that thing that you're learning that's exciting. You pick up that book that's just studying about the stock market or property or whatever it is, personal development, speaking, communication, and you get more and more involved in that. And it just continues to escalate. And then, of course, the signs of numbness. So you switch on the TV, can't even bother to communicate with them. An evening goes by, hardly anything's said. You kiss less, you hug less, there's less physical intimacy. It could be long periods of non-sexual contact, whatever. But either way, or you use the kids if you've got kids, this becomes a major one. You use the kids as a buffer to deflect it and lose yourself with the kids. And there's so many different signs, to a point where eventually one of you has a meltdown, and that's where you get to the split point. Will normally come on the back of one major thing, or one thing that feels major, but it may be not major. It could be that last seminar you went to that you just took something away from it and you said, I can't deal with this anymore. You had a conversation with another woman or another man there that had the same thing. They went through it 3 years before, had to just separate from their partner. Or it could just be that you read something, you hear something, or something happens at home, or you suddenly realize we can't carry on like this in front of our kids. Something has to change. It's usually a very big emotional thing that's beyond the relationship now that just triggers you. You just can't.
Or you listen to the Growth Tribes podcast, episode 27.
Exactly. And you're both sitting there going, oh my God, they've just painted a picture. I mean, how many times have you heard me describe something and people have gone, oh my God, that's exactly what's going on?
Yeah. I mean, if you experience this as a listener and you come join us on one of the future live events, just take a moment or a second when Rose says something on stage or one of his guest speakers says something, and you'll start to see the audience nod their head. Yeah, that's me. That's happened to me. Because what's amazing is it's such an open, honest space. And of course, people are coming there to be open, be aware, so that they can actually learn and grow and make that change. So people are like, yeah, that's me. Yeah, that's me having the argument about the bins. Yeah, that's me doing. And it's like really refreshing to see because unless they're in that space, they can't share that. It just becomes this secret thing that just continues to happen.
Yeah. When we used to run the relationship events, which at some point will re-trigger those, that was fascinating because people came in very nervous for the first half an hour. And then once we set the scene and the true transparency of the environment opened up, you saw couples that had been together for a long time sharing things that they had just locked up. They didn't want to share. And they were
Mm.
able to do it in a way that there was no feeling of animosity. It was just an honest share from the heart. And that changed the dynamic in that moment. That everything shifted.
So well, we are talking about couples here, and I've just got one question I'm curious about, which is, we are two men, and there's a slight bias towards this. But one of the questions I had is this gender specific? So, for
Mm.
example, do you typically see the man growing more, which leads to this conflict or split, or is it that the lady in the relationship grows more? And that's pretty much, yeah, that kind of question is on my mind at the moment.
It's 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 actually a very good question because I would have previously said actually, yeah, I think it's more ladies than men. That would have been me maybe 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. But I think that has changed. I actually think now there's a balance. If you think about some of the audiences that we have in front of us, and you're often at those events, it's a pretty even split. Uh, that don't get me wrong. I mean, there might be periods where I'll find myself talking to a whole bunch of ladies, but that could be because the subject or the theme of that particular event that I'm running has a softer edge to it. It might be more about personal emotional development as opposed to personal financial development. If it was personal financial development, I might see more men and women there. If it's personal emotional development, I tend to see less men there, more women there, because they are spiritually, emotionally more developed and often they need that. It's a makeup of who they are as a person. And that's not to say men don't want it. They do, and actually do need it. We all do, you and I. But the problem is, for a lot of men, it's like, okay, now I don't want to admit to that, and so they tend not to go into that space. I think the genre that we're in at the moment, this whole personal development movement that's happening, is seeing a more mixed spread overall. But
Yeah,
10, 20 years ago, definitely more female biased. And
fascinating.
but if I took you to a trading seminar, I think probably more male bias. And if I took you to a mind, body, and spirit event, or if we went there, I think we'd see probably more ladies as a general rule. But I think overall people do want to grow, and that's certainly been triggered by the number of apps that are online now and the type of people that are coming and attending personal development. I mean, you've seen it in the time that you've been doing property with me. We see a lot more spread now of men and women, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And just as an additional note, we could probably put a male male relationship in this, a female female relationship in this, because
Correct.
within that kind of relationship, I know we said male and female, but within that dynamic will be this masculine and feminine energy within that particular dynamic. So it does play out across a whole gender mix. It just really depends on who is I guess, the masculine energy and who's the feminine energy within that dynamic.
And I think as well, on that note, if you look at the way people's and society was structured previously and historically, we have talked about this. My generation, your generation, is that you go off, you'd study hard, and just the mechanics of how that industrial era and the post-war era was that the man would go out to work and the woman would stay at home and look after the kids, which is by far the most important role, and that tended to lock people into roles. And I think because of these unconscious roles that we have in our minds, it then triggers how we want to grow. And then we started to see a period where actually there was a lot of ladies saying, fuck this, I want to go and grow. I want to break out of this ridiculous mold that we've been put into. I don't want to live like we did in the 50s. And there's this huge surge, and I saw it. There was a period during the 80s where there was a lot of surge of a lot more women coming out into the events. And then I think the whole idea of personal development became more appealing to both men and women. And now it's sexy, if you want to give a name to it, for so many different people and both genders. So whereas before it might have been driven by circumstances, the roles people have been put into, now you're seeing strong characters, real celebrities and some famous people, some big names out there, male, female, with strong messages, and it's drawing both genders. So I think it's really now down to people's actual evolution. It's not even down to male or female. It's just to their own personal evolution. Where are they at, and are they ready to grow?
You've touched on a really fascinating, an additional thing I just want to just commentate on, I guess, and hear your thoughts as well, which is, you spoke about this industrial area, this industrial era where somebody would train, educate, and that would be their growth period. So just imagine a curve which is rising, typically from the age of, say, 5 to 20, 21, where you finish university. That's typically a growth period within a relationship. Internally as well. Then from that point onwards, you can pretty much draw a straight line up to the point of retirement, and then there's a slight decline. Now that straight line is a period of no growth, because actually jobs, actually careers were around for life, and a couple locked into that straight line, that became the norm back then in that time you was talking about, Ro.
Yep.
But what we have now going forward, and this has now been well documented, researchers and historians are seeing something which probably has never happened before, which is we as a couple in a dynamic, or as an individual, will probably have to grow and expand ourselves literally every 7 to 10 years. Every 7 to 10 years on the clock, we're going to have to recreate ourselves, which is going to need this requirement to learn, grow, and adapt. Now that's going to be, add that to a couple dynamic, and everything we're saying today is suddenly going to be on steroids. So that's just a little insight which I've started to see in the background, but it just came to mind, Ro, because you spoke about that classic conventional work model, which was available in the past to people, which is not really the case now going forward.
And information so readily available. Someone who is looking after the kids at home, whether it's the husband or the wife, has access to those tools, those learning skills, like a podcast like Growth Tribes, instantly during the day. So that growth can occur 24/7 if somebody wants to do it. Previously, it was traditionally, if you're a bloke and you're at work and the wife's at home looking after the children, she can't necessarily grow, but he might grow through his work. They send him off on a training course. Honey, I'm going on a 3-day training course. He still gets the growth. Whereas now the playing field is leveled. And I love it because everyone has the opportunity to grow. Then it comes down to your core makeup and who you are as a person, which takes us right back to where we are in the whole cycle. Where are you on the cycle? Who are you as a person? What's your main values? And that could be a way to end actually this podcast.
It could be, but we want to leave people with some action steps, because if they find themselves in stage 2, entering stage 3, and they feel like the curve or the wave is starting to flatten out and things are getting slower, they're almost sitting on the ocean and there's no waves helping and riding them forward, what do they do? Because how do couples essentially, and I'm going to lead the question in terms of firing at you, because you've got so much experience in this arena, which is, how do couples learn from what we have said today so that they avoid that conflict in the first place? The conflict being that when one wants to grow, they end up going these separate ways and they end up splitting. How do we get them to have some steps that they can undertake, or a process or some action points, so that they actually make a change together rather than just default to split? Because anchoring back to what you said, we don't want to give up on any couple. That's not the default. Yeah. And especially if they still love each other, which, as you said in your experience, is quite often the case.
So there's this is a great way to finish. And I was in touch yesterday with an amazing lady, a lady called Susie, who I've known for many, many years. And I messaged you to say, look, she's agreed to come on to our podcast. So those of you listening, you're going to love this, because she works with relationships, with the masculine feminine dynamic that Harminder just talked about briefly there. And one of her big things, I just want to throw this into the pot, is the physical movement that has to happen between you as a couple. In other words, it's the physical dance that happens. It's how you as a woman get into your feminine core, and as a man gets into his masculine energy, and bringing that to the table, because that's how you met. That's how you first met as a couple. So I'm going to park that for now, but I just want you to be aware that if you are numb, that numbness also means it's numbed your core energy that Harminder referred to previously, which is, if you're a feminine woman, it could be a male-male relationship, female-female relationship, whatever the relationship is, you will have a core energy that you've brought to the table when you met. and that's kept that dynamic. But when you're numb, you tend to numb that, and that gets muted, it gets switched off. So you've got to kind of stir that back up again and come back into that core energy. But there's essentially 5 steps, I would say. We've got 5 stages. Well, there's 5 steps, 5 action steps. I'll go through them briefly, and hopefully we can put them into the show notes, and then just jump in and quiz me as I go through it, Harms. So the first step is you have to focus on you and what your needs are. So I know you're thinking, well, hold on a minute, this is about the other person, I'm feeling frustrated with them. Well, yeah, I understand that. But first of all, you've got to decide what you're going to bring to the table in the conversation, because you can't bring frustration, you can't bring anger. Did a coaching session with a lady yesterday that's been in this situation for some time now, and we talked about changing the style of the conversation so you weren't coming to the table with all that frustration that's been going on. So it means sitting down with a piece of paper, writing down specifically what are your needs? What do you want to experience more of? What do you want to feel more from a relationship? Not what you want your partner to do for you, but what you
Very
want to.
different.
Yeah, very different. And I think we may have talked, I think when you came to Turning Point, we did this on the Sunday morning some years ago now, but that was fascinating at looking at, a lot of people go, yeah, but you don't do this and you don't do that. No, that's not what it's about. It's like, what do you want to experience in a relationship? What do you want to feel? What are your needs? It's not about the other person. It's about what you want to experience, not what they could do for you. It's what you want to experience, how you want it to feel. So how do you want to grow is another great question. Looking ahead now, you've hit this stage wherever you're at. The question is, how do you want to grow in the future? And then another question is an important one to answer is what frustrates you? Because you're going to bring this to the table. And ideally get your partner to do the same thing. So if they're listening, great. If they're not, maybe see if they're prepared to listen to this, or at least listen to this last part. But both of you, independent of each other, need to write down, what are your needs? What do you want to experience in a relationship? This is all part 1, by the way. Step 1, how do you want to grow? But also what frustrates you? And it can include what frustrates you about the relationship, but about how your partner is. That's really important. So it's slightly more directed now as well. That's a 20-minute, 30-minute, 1 hour, 2 hour process, depending on how deep you want to go. That's step 1. Do you want to quiz me on that before I go to step 2?
No, that works. I think, is it a journal exercise? Is
Yeah.
that what we're saying?
Great,
You've got a journal written.
I think journal. I think it's a good point, Harms. Get it into a journal. Pieces of paper can fly around, and this is your place to this is my safe space to capture how I'm feeling right now.
Yeah. So, and what energy would you say approach this with? Because we're leaving the anger, frustration at the door, but we could be creative with this. We could come from a place of, is it fair to say, look, I know we may be in a place, because we are in stage 3, stage 4, where we are frustrated and angry, but if we have fun with the way we're doing it, for example, rather than a piece of paper, could we use Post-it notes? Could we have fun with lists or demonstrate? Like, is that the right energy to approach it with?
I mean, look, whatever you feel is a good way to capture it. That's a great point. I mean, do that. I think Harminder's saying to you, look, if you don't want to sit it down in a journal, then how else can I do it? Flip charts, whatever you want to do.
PowerPoint presentation.
Gather it in, PowerPoint presentation. Maybe not actually for your partner. I think if Susie was here, and we will get her onto the podcast, this is what I was alluding to at the beginning, is go into your core energy. So if if you've got feminine energy, go into that, play some lovely music, get you into a place where you want to dance a bit freely and get back into who you are as that beautiful female person, that female energy. If you're a male and you listen to this, you're a man and you've got a strong core, masculine core, then the key thing there is to go into that energy and really get a sense of who you are and who you were when you met and what your aspirations are. So, and I think it's good exercise to go into a meditative state. So take some deep breaths, go through some calming process. I think there's a couple of free videos. I've talked about this. If you go to my website or onto Instagram or Facebook, I'm not sure, but I seem to remember doing one which you helped us get out onto line not so long ago. So go and do a small exercise like that where you center yourself and you bring yourself back to a calm place before you do the exercise, not in an angry, frustrated place, which is a good point that Harminder's raised, which takes on to step 2. And step 2 is, now you've got to sit down with your partner. So this is where you say to them, honey, there's some things we need to share. Or maybe if you're doing it together already and you're doing this in exercise, you both agree to spend a couple of nights doing step 1. And then you agree on the 3rd night to sit down together. You don't talk about it beforehand. There's no judgment here. And that's the whole thing. You come to the table with no judgment whatsoever, which is a tough one for a lot of people. So again, go into a good place and you sit down and you share with them, first of all, how you want the future to be. Describe the future. your vision of the future. So they get a strong sense of where you want to be in the future. It's not about judgment of where you are right now, but the future. And then ask your partner to describe that as well, because that's important. I mean, imagine if you're both describing something completely and radically different. I mean, that in itself triggers a different conversation. But we need to find something in your descriptions of the future that has commonality, that has that connection. All right. So that's the first thing. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. That makes sense. And on the judgment note, what I think stage one does is by actually journaling and getting down this description of, what are your needs? What do you want to experience? How do you want to grow? What frustrates you? That starts to remove some of that judgment because you've spent some time documenting, you spent some time getting it down on paper.
Yeah,
so
in a way, it's a rich relief.
Yeah, it just sort of eases. Okay, well, okay, that's a weight off my mind, a weight off my shoulder. Now I've got that on paper, and then stage two, we're really talking about those elements that we've described, plus these powerful questions, which is what do you want for your future? And I think it's a good point, which is if that what happens if they find no commonalities?
Well, okay,
what if they are very different?
So the process is, first of all, the future. Describe the future. Now, if at that point there's no commonalities, you're going to have to dig a little bit deeper. And what I would say is you then share with each other. You're going to have to do this anyway, but then you say, okay, maybe this is why I'm feeling like this. And then this is where you talk about your needs. Because in order to get to that future, certain things may need to change. You've got to be that person in the future. And this whole process, by the way, then certain values and beliefs need to change. And you may have already written those down. You described how you want to grow. And then you describe your frustrations, and you do it in an objective way with each other. You just share it to start without any kickback, no, but surely not. None of that. You just share it. And then if there is a different future described, at that point there, you both go, okay, this makes sense. This is why we're feeling like this. This is where you want to go. This is where I want to go. This is what I want to feel. This is what this is what I want to grow into. And these are my frustrations. But my frustrations are because I'm going in this direction, honey, and you're going in that direction. At that point there, that's a different conversation now. There's a conversation about should we stay together? And this is where you've got to decide you need to get a coach. Do you go for some counseling? I'm not a massive fan of counseling directly. Or can you, between the two of you, have an honest, candid conversation about where the future is now? Because if this is not the path you want to go on, there's no point in carrying on these two different trajectories. So that question you've thrown in is a very good one because it takes us into a different path, maybe for a different podcast.
Understandable. However, so then what's the next step?
Yes, however, if at that point there's a commonality in the futures and now you've shared your needs, how you want to grow and what your frustrations are, you now need to go to step 3, which is what your fears are. And so step 3 is, okay, these are my fears about where we're at the moment. I've described my frustrations and this is what I want and this is how I want the future to be. You seem to want the same things, but in order to get there, something has to change. And this is what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid that if we carry on like this, we're going to split up. We're going to have more arguments. It's going to affect the kids, whatever it is. You got to be really brutally honest. And both of you have to share your fears. And my suspicion is a lot of those fears are common for most of the coaching I've ever done. The fears are very, very common. And you have to ask yourself the question, what if we stay on this trajectory, which is going to take us to step 4? But just to press pause for a minute. So just to clarify, Harms, the fears conversation is not like a screaming, shouting match. It's just, honey, honestly, this is what I feel is going to happen if we carry on doing this. These are my fears.
And I think what my gut says to me is that one of the most common fears would be that we're just going to drift apart.
Yeah.
But from your experience, what are some maybe 1 or 2 fears that commonly pop up?
How it impacts the kids, what it does to you as a couple in terms of your finances, the business, because if you run a business together, the impact it's going to have on both your confidences. Often I get conversations with people where they're like in their late 50s or mid 50s or late 40s. And the fear is, I'm not going to meet somebody else. So, it depends on where they are. Culturally, what's family going to say? It's Asian family. We're not supposed to divorce. So the fears are driven often by the external impact of what it does to somebody else, what it does to themselves as a person, and what it does to their financial situation as well. There's usually 3 or 4 key things that seem to be the triggers for the fears. If there's kids, that's one of the biggest fears. Is the impact it's going to have the kids and the scar it's going to leave for them, and it's the model that you're leaving for your kids as well.
Interesting. And then once
which kind of leads, by the way, to you may be asking the questions, is kind of step 4, which is an expansion of step 3. Can I just jump into that? Because
Yeah,
you could
please.
argue they're the same, but they're slightly different. Step 4 is what are the consequences, meaning that you've described the fears initially, but then you really fast forward it and you go, look, what are the consequences if we carry on like this? Let's just go there now. Let's map this out, and you discuss it. You discuss what's going to happen financially. How are we going to split the portfolio? How are we going to split the business? How are we going to split the finances? What about the house? What do we do with the kids? Who's going to look after the kids? It's going to be you. It's going to be you. What about the family? I mean, if it's an Asian family or a West Indian family or Nigerian family, or you come from somewhere in the Eastern culture where maybe families are such a much stronger, and they are. I hate to say it, but I see this a lot. Whereas, say, the Western world is slightly more fractured. Those can be massive consequences for some people. So describe the consequences in detail. That's the point I want to make. And I'm talking about rip the Band-Aid off, get the finger out and prod the wound so you both really understand the massive impact of this if you don't freaking make a change. And this is what I do a lot when I'm pushing people to see if we can get them to make a transformation. Because if you're numb, you don't feel the consequences. This process takes the numbness away. It magnifies the pain, hopefully to the point where both of you say, we can't go there. I still love you, honey. We can find a way to solve this, but we cannot have those consequences.
So what we're doing in this process is we're bringing awareness to the couple of, what was the relationship in the first place? What is the relationship now? Is there a future for this relationship? And the only way to get them to that place is to get them to feel something. So this process is almost opening up that place so they can start to feel something. Otherwise, like you said, it's just a process driven approach where somebody's still getting their needs met elsewhere, and then they can't quite connect their needs back to the relationship.
Yeah, and I've got to be mindful that this might seem a little bit dark here, and if we're doing it live and I was coaching you, working with you, it would be different again, because I'd be watching your body language to make sure we don't go too dark down this rabbit hole. So step 4 has to have a balance to it, like everything has. It's the yin and the yang, it's the light and the dark. So in that process of step 4, what you have to then do is go back to what you both saw as your vision for the future, which is step 2 and step 1. So in looking at the consequences, you then say, but what if we can pursue this future vision that we both seem to have a common, imagine we could do this, imagine we could do that, the difference it would make for the kids. What if we changed this? What if we grew together? What if we learned this? What if we made that holiday? What if we sold the house and went and did that thing that we talked about for so long we've put off? And so what you do is you balance the consequences with something that's far greater, more beautiful, and for you, more real, so that you make those consequences something that you're not prepared to accept, and you have this belief that you can work towards something. You've got a history there, you've got a long history together. So what if we can make it work? Which takes us to step 5.
Which is, what do we do next? Once they work through that
Right.
process, what are their choices, I guess? What is their next steps?
Yeah, so that is it. Exactly right. Step 5 is, what do we do next? And at that point there, having had that conversation in stage 4, step 4, you go, right, what do we do next? If it's a case of, honey, let's make it work. I'm so sorry. I know when I first met you, there was things we did together. I want to get back involved with you. I want to grow. That's a really powerful, engaging, upbeat, self-directed, responsibility taking process. Or you realize, you know what, there's nothing left. We're going to have to split. And that comes from the reality that the consequences, you already accepted it. Maybe that's already where you are. Maybe there is no future that's the same, as you mentioned earlier on, and you asked that question, which is a great one. Or the third thing is you stay the same and you just numb it and you go, okay, well, maybe we should do something about it. Let's wait till the summer. Let's wait till after Christmas. Let's wait till after the family. Let's wait till after the family get together. Let's wait till after Johnny's birthday. Let's
after
wait
a
till
remortgage or
after,
something.
Yeah. Let's wait till after Sarah and Fanny get married. It's just like that. Nah. Make a decision. Grow or separate, but don't stay the same, because that's just so painful.
That's a staying the same is indecision. Yes, it can be argued that that's a decision in itself, that I'm going to stay the same, but it is also indecision, because there's 2 decisions that will make an actual change: are growing or splitting. And are we saying, well, that either are okay? If you're at this stage, either of those choices are okay.
Great
Now you've
question.
gone.
I mean, I don't, the split, and I know this, I've been there myself, right? So the split is not an ideal. And as you said, you started with a fantastic opener. The remit here, if I was coming to the table, or you, or we were working with somebody, is like, we want to make sure that let's look for a solution. Can we get this couple to grow? But if having gone through all this and a lot more work, ideally, it's just not going to happen, be honest and split. Otherwise, make a decision to grow and commit to it 100%. 99% is not going to do it. Because if it's 99%, one of you will be looking for the other person to slip up, or there'll be a reason to default back to that pattern that we talked about, the 5 stages, and that could happen as well. So it's a powerful process. It does work, and it basically filters very quickly. It cuts to the core of the problem, and if you do it effectively, you'll know the truth as a couple. This is almost a coaching session we've done today without actually being in front of somebody.
Yeah, incredible. And they can work through that. Now, to just maybe put a bit of, because the result of this will be positive, yes, the decision at that point may be really painful, even the concept of growing, because that's going to have its own growing pains, but it's going to be painful. But in the long term, that pain disappears and you start to go on to be in a relationship that you're meant to be in, or transform the current relationship into a relationship that it was just numb to, and it was just waiting for this process for you to embark on this process so that you could then discover that relationship which was just suppressed in a way to describe it. Now, one question I wanted to fire back before we close off, Ro, is can this exercise or process be used earlier in the stages? So stage 1 and stage 2?
Totally. I mean, in fact, when you came to Turning Point, 3 or 4 years ago, you were in a great relationship already, as you are now, with your lovely wife, Gina. But I took you and the other 290 something people through the similar sort of process where we looked at values, and we had that exercise done, because if you can do it on a regular basis, or have a way of doing different steps on a regular basis, it gives you a chance to keep growing. And I think that's the important thing here is that ongoing growth process that you really do need to go through. So I think you've raised a good point here. Don't wait till stage 4 or 5. Get onto it as soon as you possibly can. And I'm going to plug this because I think it is such a powerful one. If you have been listening to us and following us and downloading on the free, and you haven't taken the time yet to go and join us on the Growth Tribes, I urge you, if you're in a situation like we've described already, and you are in a relationship and you're feeling like it's kind of heading on to stage 3, please go to the Growth Tribes. Spend a month with us, go into the vault and look at the relationships series there, because that series really tackles this subject at a different level, and it tackles other areas that you may not, and we haven't had the time to cover here on this particular podcast. And I go through some pretty powerful steps that you could do very quickly as a couple to reconnect as well.
Fantastic. So, wow, what a show. And by the end of this show now, hopefully you've discovered the power in growing together as a couple and doing an exercise in order to not get yourself in a position where you are at a stage of conflict. If you are in a stage of conflict, now you have an exercise to work on that and work on the relationship itself, but also using this preemptively to continue to grow within your relationships. Going back to that cliche, couples that train together, stay together, but it's, couples that grow together, stay together, couples that learn together, stay together, and by working through this episode and this process, that is a form of that as well. That is, that's taking your relationship seriously, showing your loved one the love that they deserve by actually going through this process. So that's just a final note for myself, Ro. Everything that we've discussed will be in the show notes at growthtribes.com/podcast, especially a quick snapshot of those 5 action steps that Ro has shared with you. They will also be in the show notes. So once again, that's at growthtribes.com/podcast. I will also link you to the relationships series that Ro just mentioned. So if you want quick access to that, you'll have a way to get to that quickly. That will also be in the show notes. So for myself and Ro, that's us signing out. We'll see you on the next episode.
Hello, it's Dr. Ro here. Harms and I would both like to personally thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of Growth Tribes. And if you've gained just one insight, something positive that you're able to use on a personal level, on a professional level, to help your life, maybe even other people's lives, then we'd love it if you could take action on one of the following things. You can either simply subscribe so you don't miss out on any other great insights coming up in the future, You can share this podcast with close friends so they can also get the benefits of the tips and tools that we're sharing. Or it would be amazing if you could give us a review and let others know just how great this episode was. And finally, if you do have a question, don't forget to submit it on growthtribes.com/podcast. Thank you again for listening. This is Dr. Rowan Harms signing out, and we'll see you again on the next podcast.